Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Thursday, December 4th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The high in Riverside today is 68 degrees, with a low dipping to about 52 degrees, so expect a mild day with comfortable temps for getting out and about. Coming up, we'll explore how President Trump's diplomatic efforts helped bring the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda together for peace talks, and break down the motivations behind his push to ease federal standards on vehicle fuel efficiency. Plus, we'll cover other key developments from around the world, including updates on global markets and local community news. All this and more on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Good morning. A big headline in Washington today. Presidents Tshisekedi of the DRC and Kagame of Rwanda signed what the White House calls the Washington Accords for Peace and Prosperity. Reporter Ethan is with us. Ethan, what exactly got signed today?
Grace, this was a formal peace accord signed at the U.S. Institute of Peace that aims to end fighting in eastern Congo. According to ABC News, which cites the Associated Press, it caps months of U.S.-led mediation and builds on a preliminary deal inked by the countries, foreign ministers back on June 27th, and an economic framework initialed November 7th. The White House cast it as a historic breakthrough, with President Trump personally mediating. BBC Africa notes several African and Arab leaders attended, signaling broad regional buy-in.
So what's in it? Are there clear steps each side must take now?
The early summaries point to an immediate ceasefire and a staged withdrawal of the M23 rebels from cities like Goma and Bukavu. BBC and the Africa Report say that pullback is tied to parallel talks in Doha, where a November 15th framework between Kinshasa and M23's political wing, the Alliance Fleuve Congo, set out negotiation pillars. Rwanda's withdrawal, per the reported text, hinges on neutralizing the FDLR, a Hutu militia Kigali sees as an existential threat. Verification runs through a joint oversight committee, created after the June agreement, with a joint security coordination mechanism tracking troop disengagements.
You mentioned M23. How did the war get to this point?
The roots stretch back to the 1994 Rwandan genocide, after which nearly 2 million Hutu refugees, including perpetrators, crossed into what's now eastern DRC. According to ABC News Background, Rwanda accuses elements of the Congolese army of harboring the FDLR, while UN experts have accused Rwanda of backing M23, a largely Tutsi rebel group that resurged in 2021. This year, the conflict exploded. Reuters and AFP reporting, aggregated by multiple outlets, described M23, bolstered by Rwandan defense forces, capturing Goma in late January. The UN group of experts confirmed, quote, extensive and systematic Rwandan military involvement, end quote, in a July report.
Goma falling was huge. What happened after that?
The rebel advance rolled south into South Kivu. BBC and Reuters reported M23 pushed toward Bukavu in February, seized Kavumu Airport, and entered Bukavu's center by mid-month, with AFP and UN OCHA later confirming control of key buildings and infrastructure. Satellite imagery compilations on ReliefWeb showed M23 still holding both cities well into June, despite sporadic clashes. ABC News relayed that the offensive shut Goma's airport, disrupted banking and government services, and sent prices for basics soaring.
Does today's accord force M23 to leave those cities?
That's the intent, but it's complicated. The Africa Report says the Doha framework includes territorial relinquishment, yet M23's leadership has resisted a full handover without political concessions. Congolese officials want a total withdrawal and an end to Rwandan support for the rebels. Kigali insists FDLR must be dismantled first. The sequencing, who moves first and who guarantees what, remains the core challenge.
Who enforces all this if someone breaks the deal?
There's a monitoring and complaint channel through the Joint Oversight Committee. President Trump warned of, quote, very severe penalties, financial and otherwise, end quote, according to ABC News and CBS News. but specifics weren't laid out beyond the committee's mandate to take appropriate measures. Amnesty International analysts, cited across several outlets, argue the accord lacks sharp enforcement tools, like automatic sanctions on resource plunder or troop non-withdrawal, raising fears it could mirror past pacts that fell apart. The UN experts have urged accountability for backers of proxy groups on both sides, which would require coordinated pressure.
Was M23 at the table today?
No, and that's a sticking point. BBC notes the summit involved heads of state and regional partners, not non-state actors like M23. The group's political boss, Corneille Nangaa, has previously talked about marching on Kinshasa, and spokesperson Benjamin Mbonimpa called the November Doha document, quote, not final, end quote, according to reporting flagged by criticalthreats.org and actualite.cd. Their absence today means implementation still relies on separate channels to secure rebel compliance.
Are they even respecting the truce now?
Fighting continued right up to yesterday. BBC and Reuters report that as of December 3rd, just one day before this signing, Kinshasa accused M23 of a new push in South Kivu, about 75 kilometers from Uvira, while M23 blamed Congolese and Burundian forces for air and ground assaults. That back and forth shows how fragile the ceasefires have been since June. It also underscores why the verification mechanisms will be tested immediately.
And the U.S. role here, why put this much weight behind it?
Security is one piece, but minerals are the other. Eastern DRC holds huge reserves of cobalt, copper, lithium, coltan, and more, critical for electric vehicles, smartphones, wind power, and defense systems. BBC and The Hindu reported President Trump saying the U.S. would gain, quote, a lot of the mineral rights from the Congo as part of it, end quote, tying peace to supply chain strategy. Washington also showcased an economic track today, with a U.S. Chamber of Commerce forum promoting investment in infrastructure like the Lobito Corridor rail link.
How are Congo and Rwanda framing that economic push?
Kinshasa's line is that resources remain under national control. No sell-off. ABC News cites Congolese officials saying they want investment that builds processing capacity and jobs at home. Rwanda's Foreign Minister, Olivier Nduhungirehe, has pitched the region's prosperity as a shared project, arguing integration would benefit both sides. It's partly why the accords are paired with a regional economic integration framework to entice stakeholders to keep the peace.
Who else showed up to lend weight to the signing?
Quite a roster. ABC News and the AP list Uganda's Vice President Jessica Alupo, standing in for President Museveni, Kenya's President William Ruto, Burundi's President Evariste Ndayishimiye, and representatives from Angola, Togo, Qatar, the UAE, and the African Union Commission. The U.S. side included Secretary of State Marco Rubio. That lineup matters because those neighbors influence militias and trade routes, and their buy-in could ease border security and logistics.
What are the humanitarian priorities if the guns do go quiet?
Aid groups want corridors opened and services restored fast. Relief web summaries of UN OCHA reports show strained operations this year as displacement surged and airports shut down. The accord pledges humanitarian access and restarts for basic services, which could stabilize prices and reopen schools and clinics. But agencies warn they need funding restored, particularly after U.S. cuts, to meet needs on the ground.
Does the plan cover disarming all the groups, not just M23?
Yes, at least on paper. There's a disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration track, DDR, alongside security sector reform that could allow conditional integration for vetted fighters, as outlined in appendices to the June agreement. USIP briefings and state.gov materials discussed a DDRCS approach that also invests in communities absorbing ex-combatants. Success there is crucial. Otherwise, fighters who give up guns today could join another militia tomorrow.
And what's the mechanism dealing specifically with FDLR and Rwandan concerns?
The Joint Security Coordination Mechanism has been meeting with U.S., Qatari, Togolese, and AU participants to map out operations against FDLR and schedule disengagements. According to the Africa Report's coverage, a concept of operations was reaffirmed in October and November sessions. Amnesty notes the DRC launched an awareness campaign urging FDLR fighters to disarm, though the impact is unclear. Kigali's stance remains that meaningful movement on FDLR must precede any permanent ceasefire.
People in Goma and Bukavu, what are they saying today?
There's cautious skepticism. ABC News quoted a Goma resident, Amani Chibalonza Edith, saying, quote, "We are still at war. There can be no peace as long as the front lines remain active," end quote. A Bukavu student, Moise Bama, added, quote, "We are waiting to see what will happen, because so far, both sides continue to clash," end quote. After a year of upheaval, residents are waiting for tangible change: open roads, functioning banks, and a drop in prices.
Do experts think this deal can hold?
Opinions are mixed. BBC spoke with analyst Bram Verelst, who called the ceremony symbolic and warned it won't shift realities unless root causes are addressed. Scholar Jason Stearns told the BBC there's a potential peace dividend if economic incentives align, but the US's closeness to Kinshasa and Qatar's ties to Kigali make trust a delicate balancing act. The Washington Post and Semaphore stress that, while the optics raise leader accountability, none of it guarantees what happens in the hills and city streets.
What about Rwanda's denial of backing M23? Is that still their position?
It is. Kigali frames its posture as defensive against FDLR incursions. But UN investigators, cited by multiple outlets including the BBC, have documented Rwandan defense forces operating alongside M23, even steering operations in parts of North Kivu. That gap between official denials and UN-verified findings is one reason verification and frank reporting by monitors will be pivotal.
If the rebels drag their feet, what leverage does Washington really have?
Beyond threats of penalties, the U.S. can shape access to financing, impose sanctions on individuals or entities, and condition economic projects, especially in mining and logistics. CBS News reported Trump's warning without an enforcement timetable, which critics see as a soft spot. Still, if the U.S., EU, AU, and Gulf partners act in concert, Qatar's role matters here. The cost of noncompliance can bite. The question is whether that coordination actually happens when violations occur.
How quickly could people see changes if the parties stick to it?
The first signals would be ceasefire adherence and humanitarian corridors opening within days. Airports in Goma and Bukavu are bigger lifts. Security and airfield repairs take time. If M23 starts withdrawing, you'd expect roadblocks to ease and government administrators return, which BBC and ReliefWeb note are key to stabilizing markets. But all that hinges on sequencing agreed in the Doha-linked timeline.
Are there risks this turns into another paper peace?
Absolutely. Amnesty International and UN experts warn that without accountability for resource smuggling and command responsibility for atrocities, armed actors have every incentive to stall. Past 1990s, deals collapsed because signatories kept arming proxies and looting minerals. Analysts quoted by BBC argue this accord needs teeth, and donors must follow through when violations are documented, not 6 months later after facts on the ground have changed.
What should we watch in the next 48 hours?
3 things. First, whether clashes taper off in South Kivu after today, Reuters will be watching Uvira's approaches. Second, any movement of M23 units around Goma and Bukavu, which satellite monitors and local journalists often pick up. Third, publication of the Accord's full text on state.gov or USIP's site, clarifying enforcement and timelines. If those pieces fall into place, confidence in the process rises quickly.
And if they don't?
Then you'll hear more from civil society and church networks pushing for international pressure, while businesses eyeing the Lobito corridor slow-walk commitments. Humanitarian partners will keep warning of a funding crunch as displacement continues. According to BBC and ABC News, both presidents see U.S. involvement as a positive step, but history's weight in eastern Congo is heavy. Without concrete steps now, public optimism will evaporate by the end of the month.
For people who haven't followed this closely, why should they care?
Beyond the human toll, This conflict affects global supply chains for the batteries and electronics we use daily. Stability could mean more transparent sourcing of cobalt and tantalum and less financing of armed groups through illicit mining. The Washington Post has framed it as a test of whether the U.S. can responsibly align strategic minerals policy with peacebuilding. If it works, you get a rare win-win. If it fails, the cycle of violence and scarcity continues.
Last thing, what's the mood in Washington tonight?
Triumphant but tempered. The optics. A packed hall at the U.S. Institute of Peace, leaders shaking hands, are the kind of moment policymakers crave. But seasoned Africa hands, including those quoted by BBC and Semaphore, are reminding everyone that success will be measured in fewer funerals, reopened schools, and trucks moving safely down the RN2, not in speeches. The next week will tell us if this is a turning point or just another photo op.
Ethan, thanks for breaking this down. We'll keep watching how the Washington Accords play out in the days ahead. Good morning. A big shift in U.S. fuel economy rules was unveiled yesterday. Chloe is here to break it down. What exactly did the Trump administration just propose?
The White House rolled out a plan on December 3rd, so yesterday, to weaken federal fuel economy standards for new cars, SUVs, and light trucks through the 2031 model year. According to an Associated Press report carried by ABC News, the target would be a fleet-wide average of 34.5 miles per gallon by 2031. That's a sharp turn from the Biden-era trajectory toward 50.4 miles per gallon by the same year. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, is the agency writing the rule.
How big is that gap in real terms?
It's substantial. NHTSA currently measures averages around the high 30s, about 39 miles per gallon today. So instead of ramping up, the new plan largely taps the brakes, with just a 0.5% annual increase in stringency. Under Biden, the pace was 2% a year, and earlier Obama rules contemplated even faster gains. NPR and The Washington Post have both framed this as a meaningful rollback of pollution controls tied to vehicle efficiency.
What reasons is the administration giving?
The White House argues this is about affordability and safety. President Trump said at the Oval Office event that stricter standards forced automakers into pricier technology, adding, quote, expensive, end quote, costs that he claimed raise sticker prices and reduce quality. He said the change could save buyers about $1,000 per vehicle, a point ABC News emphasized, with Kelley Blue Book putting the average new car price at roughly $49,766 in October 2025. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy has also called the prior rules, quote, illegal, end quote, for counting EVs in a framework designed around gasoline.
Is there actually a federal EV mandate?
No, there isn't. The Biden administration encouraged a target of about 50% electric vehicle sales by 2030, but that was non-binding. Cox Automotive data put EVs at only about 8% of U.S. new vehicle sales in 2024. Trump repeatedly labels it a mandate for political effect, as outlets like CBS News have pointed out. The new plan explicitly excludes EVs from these mileage calculations.
How do these CAFE standards work day to day?
They set the average fuel economy a manufacturer's fleet must achieve, measured in miles per gallon. Historically, they're a major driver of efficiency improvements, cutting gasoline use and emissions over time. EPA and NHTSA have documented that since the 1970s. According to NPR, they've helped push averages from the teens decades ago to near 40 mpg today. Automakers can comply with a mix of engine improvements, vehicle design changes, and credits, though this plan proposes winding down some credit trading.
What's changing with credits?
The draft would eliminate intermanufacturer credit trading starting with the 2028 model year. The administration argues that trading propped up the EV sector by letting companies buy their way into compliance with credits from more efficient rivals. NHTSA's draft says that distorts the market for what it calls, quote, vehicles Americans want, end quote. Critics warn it could actually reduce flexibility and raise costs for some carmakers, a point the drive highlighted.
And they're excluding EVs from the math entirely?
That's right. The draft Notice of Proposed Rulemaking says EVs won't count in setting or meeting these gasoline-based averages, something Secretary Duffy says aligns with congressional intent. This leans on a June 2025 NHTSA interpretive rule that Inside Climate News reported on, arguing the relevant statute focuses on petroleum use. Historically, though, EVs earned credits via a Department of Energy formula that equated electricity to gallons of gas.
Didn't DOE tweak that formula recently?
It did. DOE removed a long-standing multiplier, the fuel content factor, in a March 2024 update for model year 2027 onward, which lowered the MPG equivalent assigned to EVs. That change made EV credits less generous even before this latest proposal. Resources for the Future noted the update was meant to better reflect real-world energy use and emissions.
What else is bundled into this proposal?
It resets the baseline to 2022 and then climbs at just 0.5% a year. NHTSA's draft regulatory impact analysis claims that by easing compliance, more people can afford newer, safer cars, which they say would save over 500 lives and prevent about 250,000 serious injuries through 2050. The agency also projects $109 billion in savings for families over 5 years, largely from lower vehicle prices. The document is on nhtsa.gov as of today, December 4th.
How do they reconcile this with EPA emissions rules?
NHTSA says CAFE is separate from EPA's greenhouse gas standards for 2027 through 2032, but the administration is moving to unwind those two. The stated goal is, quote, one national standard, end quote, marrying efficiency and emissions policies. The Washington Post reports that the White House sees dual tracks as confusing and burdensome. Environmental groups counter that harmonization here simply means leveling down.
Where do automakers stand?
Broadly supportive, at least on the record. Ford CEO Jim Farley called it, quote, a win for customers and common sense, end quote, crediting Trump for balancing affordability with progress, even as Ford invests billions in EVs. Stellantis chief Antonio Filosa praised the, quote, realignment, end quote, with market conditions, and GM said it backs the rule's goals while keeping a mixed electric-gas portfolio. Fox Business and CBS News both noted industry complaints about compliance costs under the prior trajectory.
Any notable absences or caveats there?
GM's Mary Barra didn't attend. A plant manager stood in, which CBS News flagged as a symbolic hedge. And while carmakers welcome flexibility, they're also wary of whiplash if future administrations swing back toward stricter rules. The Detroit News has reported executives are trying to preserve optionality for EVs without alienating buyers sensitive to price. They face the reality that charging infrastructure and consumer demand are still uneven.
What about the environmental response?
It's been blistering. Dan Becker of the Center for Biological Diversity said this fuels oil dependence and global warming by pushing more gasoline burning. Catherine Garcia at the Sierra Club warned it increases gas consumption, family costs, and pollution that harms children and older adults. Albert Gore of the Zero Emission Transportation Association argued it won't meaningfully cut car prices, but will boost gasoline demand and undercut U.S. EV investments.
Are there hard numbers on pollution impacts?
NHTSA's own 2024 analysis for the previous standards projected saving 14 billion gallons of gasoline by 2050, as AP and CBS News noted. By contrast, softer rules could translate into tens of thousands of extra tons of carbon dioxide annually by the mid-2030s. AP cited a figure of roughly 111 tons of CO2 a year by 2035, plus more soot and smog-forming pollutants. Broader assessments from E2 and Newsweek estimate up to 100 billion additional gallons of gasoline burned through 2050 if standards are softened, costing drivers around $185 billion in fuel. Public health experts tie those emissions to premature deaths, bronchitis, and ER visits.
The White House says families will save money. Do independent analysts agree?
Not really. Consumer Reports has long found that smaller upfront price cuts often get erased by higher lifetime fuel bills, especially if gas prices rise. CBS News and The Guardian reported that Biden's standards were projected to save $23 billion in fuel overall, while this rollback's $1,000 per vehicle savings could vanish at the pump. When you include health costs from pollution, economists at groups like the Niskanen Center say the net benefits tilt towards stronger standards.
And what's the legal hook they're using?
It centers on the Energy Policy and Conservation Act, which tells NHTSA to set the, quote, maximum feasible, end quote, fuel economy, but has a subsection that's been interpreted to limit considering dedicated alternative fuel vehicles like EVs when setting the standards. The administration argues that means EVs shouldn't factor in CAFE calculations, relying on that June interpretive rule. Historically, EVs were encouraged through credits under the Alternative Motor Fuels Act of 1988 and DOE's petroleum equivalency formulas. Courts have upheld incentives before, though a June 2025 Supreme Court ruling in Diamond Alternative Energy LLC versus EPA trimmed state EV authority, which the administration says bolsters its hand.
How does this fit with California's role?
Earlier this year, the administration and congressional Republicans blocked California's Clean Air Act waiver that lets the state set tougher rules, including a phase-out of new gas cars by 2035. According to AP reporting picked up by 6 ABC and the Philadelphia Inquirer, that also pinched the 17 or so states that typically follow California. It's part of a broader push to centralize authority and limit state-level climate policies on vehicles. California and allied states are expected to sue.
There have been other rollbacks too, right?
Yes. In July 2025, Congress passed the, quote, One Big Beautiful Bill Act, end quote, which effectively set penalties for missing mileage targets to zero, removing a key enforcement stick. The administration also eliminated up to $7,500 in federal EV tax credits earlier this year. NPR notes that collectively, these steps make gasoline vehicles relatively more attractive and slow the policy momentum behind electrification.
What's the process from here?
Once the draft appears in the Federal Register, NHTSA says that's coming soon, there'll be a 45-day public comment period. People can submit feedback at regulations.gov with instructions in the filing. The agency then reviews comments and can revise the rule before finalizing it, likely sometime in 2026. Lawsuits from states and advocacy groups are almost certain to follow, as the Washington Post reports.
How are safety claims being debated?
NHTSA argues that lower prices mean faster turnover of older vehicles, bringing newer crash avoidance tech to more drivers, which they say will save lives. Critics counter that safety isn't a trade-off with efficiency. Modern cars can be both efficient and safe, and that encouraging more gasoline use raises other health risks. Consumer Reports and independent engineers say the evidence for a price-driven safety surge is mixed. They also stress that stronger standards often spur design innovations without sacrificing safety.
Put this in historical context for us.
CAFE was born from the 1970s oil crisis to reduce dependence on imported petroleum. It's been tightened and loosened over the decades, but broadly pushed steady gains. Trump's first term produced the Safe Vehicles Rule that slowed increases to about 1.5% a year. This plan goes even slower at 0.5%. As NPR's coverage on Montana Public Radio noted today, the trade-off is short-term affordability versus long-term climate and fuel cost impacts.
What's the market reality for EVs right now?
It's mixed. EV sales are growing, but from a small base. About 8% of new sales in 2024, per Cox Automotive, and charging infrastructure still isn't evenly distributed. Automakers poured billions into batteries and assembly lines, but they're recalibrating timelines as demand proves choppy. The rollback gives them more breathing room on gas models, but it could also slow investments that experts say are critical to competing with China and Europe.
If finalized, how big is the climate impact?
The Biden standards were estimated to avoid around 710 million metric tons of CO2 by 2050, according to analyses summarized by Niskanen and RFF. Softening them forfeits a big chunk of that, while pushing fuel use higher. E2's estimate of up to 100 billion extra gallons burned translates into substantial added emissions, even before you count upstream refining. Health researchers warn that the added soot and smog precursors raise risks for asthma and heart disease.
What should listeners watch for next?
Watch the Federal Register docket go live, likely within days, and the comments from automakers, states, and public health groups. Also look for whether NHTSA tweaks the EV exclusion and credit trading provisions, which are legal flashpoints. EPA's parallel greenhouse gas policy will be a key piece too. If that falls, this becomes the dominant federal guardrail. And keep an eye on court filings from California and coalition states.
Bottom line for drivers, thinking about their next car.
If the rule takes effect, you might see more lower-trim gasoline models on lots and less pressure on car makers to juice MPG in every segment. That could mean modestly lower upfront prices on some vehicles, but potentially higher fuel costs over time, especially if gas prices bounce. Independent analysts say running the numbers on total cost of ownership is more important than ever. And incentives for EVs are thinner now, so shoppers won't get as much federal help as they did a year ago.
Chloe, thanks for helping us make sense of it.
Thanks, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. A landmark ruling has Silicon Valley searching for new ground rules. U.S. District Judge Amit Mehta says Google won't have to split off Chrome or Android, rejecting the Justice Department's most drastic remedy in the antitrust case. But the search giant won't get off scot-free. The court ordered Google to share its search index and user interaction data with qualified competitors, including Microsoft's Bing, DuckDuckGo, and emerging AI players, to help them sharpen their search results. The ruling also bars Google from exclusive default deals on devices, putting a dent in its multi-billion-dollar arrangements with Apple and Samsung, though non-exclusive distribution can continue. The judge called the data access mandate a more proportionate tool in a fast-evolving market shaped by generative AI. Translation: no breakup, but the walled garden gets a few gates, and rivals may finally get to plant some seeds. Denmark is hitting pause on kids scrolling. The government has clinched a political deal to ban social media access for children under 15, part of a push led by Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen to stop platforms from stealing our children's childhood. Parents could consent for 13 and 14-year-olds, but the default is, not yet. Fresh figures from December 3rd show 98% of Danes aged 8 to 25 are on social media, juggling accounts across roughly 6 platforms. Numbers officials say underscore rising anxiety and depression. Enforcement details are in the works, with age checks likely tied to Denmark's mid-ID or an EU-aligned system. Copenhagen's move joins a global chorus raising digital age limits, following Australia's under-16 ban. In short, from swipe right to right-sized, as Denmark aims to detox the timeline. A new KFF poll rings the insurance alarm. 1 in 4 Affordable Care Act enrollees say they'll likely drop coverage if enhanced federal subsidies expire at year's end. Without action from Congress before December 31st, average annual premiums for millions of subsidized customers could more than double, from $888 to $1,904. Nearly 60% already report trouble covering deductibles and copays. The elevated subsidies, born in the pandemic and extended by the Inflation Reduction Act, now face a fiscal cliff that could raise the uninsured rate and rattle the individual market if healthier consumers opt out. It's sticker shock that could become system shock unless lawmakers prescribe an extension. Across the North Atlantic, the UK and Norway are tightening the net. In the Luna House Agreement, the Allies will run joint naval patrols to counter a 30% rise in Russian activity near UK waters and to safeguard undersea cables and pipelines. The plan integrates their anti-submarine forces and fields, at least 13 British-built Type 26 frigates, to guard the vital GI-UK gap between Greenland, Iceland, and the UK. It's not just defense. It's industrial muscle, anchored by a £10 billion deal for Norway to buy 5 ships, securing thousands of Scottish shipyard jobs. Call it cables, pipelines, and lifelines. And in Beijing, a meeting of minds and markets. China's Xi Jinping and France's Emmanuel Macron pledged deeper cooperation on trade while tackling global crises from Ukraine to Gaza. Macron urged Beijing to press Moscow toward a ceasefire. Xi voiced support for peace efforts and announced $100 million for Gaza's reconstruction. The leaders oversaw 12 agreements spanning nuclear energy, agriculture, and aviation, with promises of wider access for French firms. As Paris eyes the G7 presidency in 2026, both sides pitched strategic independence, a diplomatic duet aiming to lower the volume on great power discord while turning up the trade. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with GPT-5, Gemini Pro 3, Gemini Flash 2.5, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.